Streaming. Okay, now we are live.
Uh, Let me
Perfect.
refresh, and I see RPG Maker. Okay.
Excellent. Oh, did I
Oh,
yeah, I am also sharing with you on Discord. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm keeping the video muted on my end, so that you know that the feedback messing with your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's never fun.
All right. So I mean, I'll wait an extra minute or so before we begin in earnest.
Yeah, just let me know when to announce it.
Go ahead.
Uh, I'm just gonna do it in general,
Yeah.
unless you really want me to do it in announcement.
No, I think general is totally fine because announcements.
Okay.
I feel like announcements is for less like time limited things.
Mhm. Hey, Excella's here. Um,
Hooray! How's it
okay,
going,
all
Asila?
right.
All right.
Waiting.
So
Yeah,
let's.
so I think fair. Okay, so I think since Asila is here, why don't we just answer that question to begin with?
Yeah.
Um,
So Asila wanted to know how battle rewards sort of work. Um,
yeah.
so we have a couple different sort of variables that we establish. We've got a game variable called skill IDs common, in which we store an array. Which this would be akin to saying, I'm going to go into code for a second and say var r equals, this is a new array, and we can populate that array with numbers. Sorry, let me format that correctly. And so then if I were to reference an index in the array, let's say r3, that would be index 3 of the array. So starting 0, 1, 2, 3. Maybe I should have not used. Maybe I should have not used
Not use
purely
numbers. Yeah.
like ordered numbers. Um,
Yeah. Okay. I'd say calm down. It's okay. We got the stream. You can take it slowly, right?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, so why
So
don't we so before we jump into the code explanation, why don't we jump back to the project?
yeah,
Um, yeah. So as you can see, we have a bunch of numbers within this array. So like you've dealt with arrays before, but just for context, Isaiah, if you go into skills,
yes,
yeah. So the numbers in the array correspond to the IDs of the skills that are in here, and then we have a variable for each rarity of skill, right?
mm-hmm.
In initialize, we are manually setting them. We don't need to actually do it this way. In fact, Isaiah can probably figure out a good way to filter the data skills
Yeah,
based on type. But this is a low tech way of just determining what the different pools are from which you get your different rewards from, right? So this is a big long array. We don't actually want all of these numbers when we go and make a reward selection. Hey, Reiko's in chat as well.
oh heck yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and Neil, I think you were the one that figured out that you can store arrays inside game variables, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
I think let's actually ask chat. So how much of this do you all want to be code explanation as opposed to just how to do it within RPG Maker, right? Um, I think one thing that you can tell us is, um, do you know what variables are and how they work? Hey, Ultimate Victor's also in chat. Thank you for joining us. Um, so yeah, I think you all let us know how code specific do you want it to be, or like how like designer friendly you want it to be. Um, so if you want sort of a designer friendly route, right, we can tell you how to do it through the eventing in RPG Maker. If you want more of the coding stuff, then Isaiah will jump into Visual Studio and explain how variables work, how arrays work, right? and how we're doing the filters and things like that.
I'm as close to literally itching as possible to describe how code works. Um, but I
So
think
let's give them a moment to respond before we commit to a path.
yeah, my enthusiasm may be a little overbearing for
Mhm.
people who are maybe less code inclined.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Okay, so in that case, Isaiah, let's jump to Visual Studio and I think explain what variables are, and then go into arrays, right?
Okay,
Because I
you know
think
what? You're right. I
getting
should
the
have started with regular
yeah,
variables. So in JavaScript, there are essentially three ways to declare a variable. A variable is essentially any series of letters which contain a piece of information. So if I were to say, actually, this would probably work better in the console than in Visual Studio. So let me boot
sure.
up the game and open the console. So I've got it zoomed in. So if I were to say var test variable equals 6, then I hit enter, and then if I tell it to output test variable, it's going to give me 6. And that is the very basics of how variables work. In JavaScript, there are essentially three different types of variables. There's number variables, such as 6. It could also be something like equals 6.75, and that's a floating point number. We can also have don't want to name it string. I'll call it test string. We also have string variables, which contain a piece of text. And numbers and text are not the same thing, as you might expect, which is which is why this difference is critical. And then the final variable type is object, and an object is essentially a series of variables that have been mashed together into one larger variable that you can refer to all at the same time. And
Isaiah, do you have a Paint on your computer?
I do have Paint.
Yeah, so we can use this to sort of illustrate like what an object is and how the component variables might work.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea of like yeah?
Um, so normally you have a variable which I'll do. So let's say you've got a variable which is this box, and it refers to this set of data, which is this circle. Now, normally, whenever you store something in this box, or whenever you store information in a box, whenever you call the box, you're referring to the information, which is the circle. With an object specifically, you have a more complex relationship where you have a box which itself has a bunch of smaller boxes, and each one of those boxes has access to information.
So why don't we go and fill this out with an example? Right?
Okay.
It's a little bit abstract. Yeah.
So yeah, so let's say I'm trying to come up with like an object example. Let's
I mean, actor.
yeah, actually, actor is an excellent example. So there's a class in RPG Maker called Game Actor, and you can think of a class as a template for an object. That's not 100% correct, but it's useful for our purposes. And the actor has a variable called HP, right? And that HP might be 100. But it has another variable called MHP, which stands for max HP, which is 200. So then we know that this actor is at half health. And you will recognize these variable names inside damage formulas, because those are the variables that are being referenced inside the damage formulas for skills. A game actor will also have something which maybe needs a different shape than a box. I'm gonna give it I'm gonna give it a pentagon because it's super cool. And this is called this is for a function. So we might say HP rate. And the HP rate, instead of storing information, it stores a bit of code that when you call it will be processed in some way. And what HP rate does is it divides HP by max HP to find out what percentage of HP you're at. So if you were to call actor.hp rate, it would return 50%, or it would return 0.5.
Yeah, we returned 0.5, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do a small stopping point here. Is everybody following so far? Do you have any questions on what is currently up on screen?
I'll label this.
Mm-hmm. I'm also sort of giving Isaiah some time to breathe every time we do this.
I do go a little fast.
Mm-hmm. Okay. At least not seeing anything in chat so far in terms of questions. Okay, yeah, so that's clear. Okay. All right, so we've established that an object, right, is essentially a set of variables, and it can contain variables and functions, right? So the variables will contain information, and functions may manipulate that information and then give that back to us. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So how would we go about defining our own object, right? So game actor has already been defined in the RPG Maker base code. So what if we had to do it from scratch? How would we do it, let's say, in the console?
All right. So let me refresh just so that I can clear the console. I'm going to create a new object, which is just going to be called person. So I'm going to say var person, and I'm not creating a class of object. I'm just creating a specific object. So whereas normally I would say 16 for a number, test for a string. If I want to make it an object, I need to give it these brackets. So if I were to say show me what person is, it's just a bunch of empty brackets. And in JavaScript, because JavaScript is the stupidest programming language in the world, you can define an object and then give it extra variables over time. So if I were to say person.age equals 14, right? Let's make them 21 so they can drink alcohol, right? So now if I were to ask it to tell me person, this person has a variable named age, which stores the value of 21. And then I can say person.gender equals M. So 21-year-old man, right, is this person. We're slowly fleshing out who they are. And now in the console, you can see that this person has 2 data members.
Yeah. I think it was actually pretty good that you made gender a string, because then we can change it, right?
Exactly.
We can it doesn't have to be defined to like a fixed number of gender, but like we can just keep adding. We can create new ones, right? That kind of thing.
And if you there's one last thing that I want to say real quick, which is that if you ever find yourself looking at somebody's plugin and you see them access an object data member in this way, person gender, that is another valid way to access the data members of person, where the word gender is encased in a string, and we're accessing the data member as if it's an array. This is not a way that I encourage people to format their object references, but it is a way that you can, and because it's formatted in a string, you can say var data member equals gender, and now I can say person data member, and that will give me the value of the gender. So that is one reason you might access it that way. It's not the way that I typically recommend accessing object data members. But I wanted to make you aware that this is a potential format that some plugin developers might use.
Okay, so now that we've established how number variables work, how strings work, and how objects work, what is an array in JavaScript?
All right. So an array is essentially a variable which has access to uh, a, I would say, non-finite number of other variables which are indexed from 0 until the length of the array. So, for example, let's say var r equals, and I'll have a series of strings this time. Test 1, and then test 16, and then test, but actually it's real. Oh, I can't put a quotation mark in there. Um,
Yeah.
so this is a variable which has access to three different actual pieces of data. So if I wanted to access test one, which is the first of the three variables, then I would want to say array index of 0. And the reason it's 0 is because when we count indexes for arrays, we start from 0. Um,
So,
so
so one thing that would be useful is that if you actually type R into the console and then let it output it, it actually nicely formats it for you.
yes, which
Yeah.
is very nice. You can see 0 is test 1, 1 is test 16, and 2 is test, but it's actually real. Um,
Yeah. So the thing about arrays is that RPG Maker, at least as far as MV and MZ are concerned, but this is actually coming from even before the JavaScript days.
mhm,
Everything runs through arrays. The
everything.
reason that, yeah, the reason that maps, all right, have like ID numbers, the reason that common events have ID numbers, the reason that skills have ID numbers is that these are all arrays, right? And when, for example, let's say that we wanted to access a skill, like looping back around to the Excelos question,
Mhm.
um, Isaiah, how would we access, let's say, dispel, right, which is skill number 13?
Okay, so so RPG Maker takes this entire list of skills and it stores them in a variable called data skills. So if I hit enter on that, you're gonna see there are 201 skills. We're not gonna open that because that's just gonna be terrifying. But if I were to say data skills and then dispel is number 13,
Yep.
that would give me specifically the dispel skill. We can find its name is dispel here, and this skill is an object, which means that it has a bunch of other variables, and it has some of the variables are arrays. As you can see here, the effects is actually an array of other objects, so it can it's just variables all the way down, and that's how we can
So
access. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, no. So yeah, I think you're completely right. One of the things I did want to mention is that when you're accessing arrays in RPG Maker, usually they reserve, not always, but usually for the dollar sign variables, right? So game variables, game switches,
Hmm.
data skills, data system, right? The zeroth index, right, is usually reserved for something, right?
Yeah,
Um, right? So that's why these arrays, quote unquote, begin at one, even though they don't really, right?
yeah.
Um,
You can see it
yeah,
index 0 on data skills. I'm gonna open this and regret it. Um, oh, hilarious! It will it'll only open
it's been
100 at a
nice.
time.
Yeah,
That's actually really neat. The zeroth index is actually set to null, so that way,
yes,
um, I think RPG Maker designs it that way for like ease of use for the average person who does not necessarily know to start at 0. So you can see,
yes.
skill 1 is where the database starts. That's also where the
Mhm.
actual like list of skills to access start.
Yeah. So, Isaiah, could I ask you to access, and I'm curious what error message will pop up when you do this. Could you access -1, um,
Yeah.
the -1 element of data skills? Just to, and this is just to sort of explain it.
Oh,
Okay,
that's
so
interesting.
it'll say that,
It doesn't
yeah,
throw an
so it'll say
error.
that's, yeah, and JavaScript is sometimes nice that way. However, this is an error that any of you that are working with card game combat, right, may have run into. You'll run into like index is undefined, right, or
Mm.
like trying to access a variable of undefined. This is why it happens usually, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not in every case, but essentially, what the console is telling you, right, is that um, so we had created an object before, and the object had multiple variables in it, right? So we had actor, an actor had HP, MHP, right, and it had a bunch of functions, right? But imagine if like we were trying to access the HP of something that like didn't have HP, right? Or something that wasn't there, right? Then you would run into this error that is very frequent, right, when working with RPG Maker, which is, hey, you tried to access HP of undefined.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when you see that error, don't panic, right? Nothing horrible has happened. But what is actually happening is that you're somewhere in the code, somewhere in an eval, somewhere in the way that you've done your eventing, you're trying to access a variable of a thing that like doesn't have like the memory has not been allocated for it,
Mm-hmm.
right? The object isn't set up that way, right? The other thing I wanted to illustrate with this is that um, your indexes start at 0 and then they count up. You cannot go back, right? So you can't go to -1, -2, -3, because that doesn't really make sense, right? Like when you have an array, when you have a sort of a fixed number of objects, right? Let's say you have 3 apples, you eat one, you go down to 2 apples, you eat one, you go down to 1 apple, then you eat that, then you're at 0 apples. You can't go to -1 apples, right? It doesn't quite exist. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that the other very common error that you might run into is if you try to access beyond the number of indexes that an array has. So in our previous array, if you go back to ARR,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Which has a length of
So
3.
this, yeah. So let's try to access 4, right, and see what happens.
So
It is undefined.
I
Yeah.
think the console is not giving us an error. If you try to do this in code, it would generate an error. If you try to do something
Yeah.
with the array index 4, it would say, "Hey, that doesn't exist. Index is not defined."
Yeah. Um, So that is the thing to be aware of with when working with arrays is that it organizes your data very nicely, right? It categorizes it just like the database does. And if you do run into an error, it is usually because of three things. Either you're accessing an index that the array doesn't have, or you're accessing a variable that the object doesn't have, or you're successfully accessing the index in the array, but what is in there is null, which can happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very like JavaScript kind of thing to happen.
Uh,
So yeah,
yeah, I want to point out another thing about this array component. So you can see 0, 1, 2, those have variables, but then there's this extra thing at the bottom here that says length 3. Now that's not just a piece of information that's useful to have. It certainly is, but it's also a data member in itself. So if I say r.length, it will give me 3, because that's essentially a variable. And now if I were to say our index of 3, which currently contains nothing, and I were to say new thing, now I've added another component to array, and now you can see it has a length of 4. So it's a variable that automatically updates whenever you add a new thing to the array, and that's really useful to make sure, that if you're trying to access the index of an array, you want to make sure whatever index you're accessing is not higher than or equal to this length. And the fact that we have access to the length basically whenever we want is very nice.
yeah, okay, that sounds pretty good.
So I think with all that said, we're ready to sort of get into how rewards are generated in the demo.
But again, before we jump in,
Okay.
again throwing it to the chat. Based on the stuff, can you bring up the console again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Based on the stuff that you saw for arrays, are there any questions that you would like us to address? Anything you need us to clarify? This is also a check to see if chat is awake.
Yeah. In the meantime, I'm gonna do something funky, and I'm gonna say r dot length equals r dot length.
Okay.
And now,
all right, still pretty clear.
And now, because its length was 4, at index 4, I've added the variable 4, which has changed its length to 5. So
Okay.
you can...
So this last part, this is, so you may, some of you may be coming from other programming languages.
Mhm.
This is very much a JavaScript thing. It is very silly that you can do this. You usually cannot do this in most languages.
Yeah.
At least as far as I'm aware. You have to use a different kind of data structure, right? If you want to link together data of different types, right, in the same array.
Yeah.
JavaScript is very accepting when it comes to stuff like this.
Also, most programming languages have a fixed length for arrays. So whenever you create an array, you typically have to establish how long it's going to be. And in JavaScript, you just don't have to do that. You can just say, I could even say, how did I originally declare the array? So I originally declared it and gave it several things all at once. But something else you can do, and I'm going to refresh and start over. I could just say var array equals, and it's just an empty array. It's an array that contains no indexes, and then I have to manually say equals new thing. And now it's an array with only... Oh, it's because I set it at index 1. I didn't start from 0. But that's actually a great opportunity because notice when I add something at index 1, it says, well, something has to be at index 0. Even if index 0 is empty, we mark the fact that index 0 is empty. Okay.
Okay. Let's in that case, let's move back to the common event.
Yes. So in initialize, which we call at boot up of the demo project, we set the skill ID's common game variable to an array containing just a lot of numbers, and these numbers each correspond to a skill ID, which is just any of these skills, the number right next to them. So we know that this game variable contains an array, and then when we call battle reward common, let me actually let me copy.
Yeah, I think copy this over to Visual Studio and
so it's much larger.
Yeah, so it's much larger.
Feel free to vamp while I'm doing this.
Yeah, so looking at chat, so yeah, Reiko Lucas mentioned that they were drawing some similarities to Z++, which is good. Yeah, and people seem to be following on so far, which is great. So part of the reason that we've had to sort of bunch together the code in the common events, is due to the sort of restriction that. The sort of artificial restriction that RPG Maker gives us, which is whenever you're doing a script call, it has to be a fixed number of lines, right? This is not a real restriction. You can actually put multiple script calls right after each other and have those variables carry over sometimes. Right? So usually when we're working with code, we're working in something, this program, if you haven't run into it before, is called Visual Studio. It's called these are what are called an IDE, which I believe stands for Intelligent Development Environment.
I thought it was integrated, but
integrated. Yeah. Okay, it probably is integrated. So we're usually working something like this. This is just a fancy notepad.
Yeah.
If we're being honest, it just helps us organize our code and to be able to quickly search through a thing.
By the way, Neil, I'm getting some feedback when I talk.
Yeah, unfortunately, that'll be the case. It looks like my headphones have run out of juice, so I will mute myself when I'm
because this is a glorified Notepad document, you can actually type this all into a Notepad document if you want, as long as the file you save as is a .js file. So you can sort of barely see because it won't let me make this text any larger. This is called script1.js. That's just the file extension for a JavaScript file. If I were to, make a Notepad document and save it as a .js file, that would be read just as well. I just don't recommend typing code into Notepad because it doesn't have some of the various things that are helpful for writing code, such as you can see, for example, so this is a game variable, this is a function, and then this is a string, and you can see that the string is formatted in a different color. And you can see the text is also formatted in a different color, and that makes it much, much more readable. Because knowing the difference between those three things is very critical. Okay, so
yeah, so let's sort of walk through the code.
Yeah.
If you're okay with me talking through this section.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with line 4, and then Isaiah, if you could do you want to either comment the code or sort of annotate it essentially?
Yeah, I'll add comments.
Yeah, I'll add comments.
Okay. So the first thing that we're doing in this script call is we're setting variable 3 to -1. The reason I think I did this was so that we're using variable 3 in all of the other common events that have to do with rewards. So because I'm not necessarily sure if we're using it before, we're resetting it to -1, right? So the equivalent of this would be, go to control variables, go to 3. Yeah, this is what is called the card manipulation target. We are using this across the project, right, for sort of different things. Isaiah, if you could go back to the...
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing that we're doing is we're setting variable 3 to -1. Then we're creating a variable. This is a good time to explain the difference between local and global variables.
Mm-hmm.
All of you that have been working in RPG Maker have dealt with this before. So the idea is that when we do $game variables, that is referencing what is called a global variable. These are variables that are available to us everywhere in the RPG Maker project, more or less everywhere. There's a couple places you can't access them, but for the most part, these are reserved. You can access them from every place, right? And they're organized in in a particular kind of sensible kind of manner, right? var skill IDs is only for this particular common event. Once this common event is done, var skill IDs doesn't the memory for it. I don't know how JavaScript exactly handles it, but in most programming languages, when you declare a local variable, the memory that is used for it is deallocated, which means it doesn't exist after the processing is done, right? So in this case, we're doing a particular operation. So we're taking game variable 4. Isaiah, could you show them what game variable 4 is?
Yeah.
Back on the
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is skill IDs common, right? So game variable 4 is that giant list of skill IDs, which contains all of the card IDs at common rarity, right? And then we're doing a function to it, which is called slice. You will run into these slice and splice. These two functions, you will run into it over and over again when you look at our demo project. Yeah, so here's the main difference. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So to explain, slice. So both of these operate in a certain way, where they allow you to. So you all know that arrays have multiple elements to them. These functions allow us to select what is called a subset of an array, right? So let's say you have an array of 5 elements, but you really only want elements 2, 3, and 4. You can use slice and splice in order to just grab that section. Here's the main difference between them, though. Slice will grab what is called Isaiah, is shallow copy correct?
Yeah, it's a shallow copy.
Yeah, it's a shallow copy.
Yeah. So it'll essentially grab a copy of that subset, right? So if we have an array of 5 elements, we're going to grab 2, 3, and 4. and it'll leave the old array alone, right? It'll just grab the copy of it. Splice is a little bit more, is just destructive the right word?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So splice actually manipulates the array, right? So let's say that we have that array of 5 elements. Once you do a splice operation for elements 2, 3, and 4, you actually tell the operation, hey, I want to get rid of these, right, from the original array, right? And so what happens is that splice, right, this is with a P, it'll take that section, make it its own variable, and the old array will now be resized to an array of 2, right? Yeah. So for the purposes of this operation, what we're doing is we're taking a copy of that of that list of common skill IDs. Cool. All right, moving on. We declare a new variable which is called reward pool. This is, as we have done, an empty array, right? This doesn't contain anything in it, and we will be using this for the cards that we want to show in our little like booster pack or this sort of after fight reward, right? That we're doing, right? Next up, we have a for loop. Isaiah, want to explain how loops work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just format this in a way that I find personally prettier. So a for loop is essentially a shorthand for do this thing X amount of times. So this would say this in a very brief sort of way to explain it says repeat 3 times. So we can see for variable I equals 0, we create a new variable called 0. We iterate through this loop until I is equal to or greater than 3. Essentially, we continue iterating through the loop while I is less than 3, and at the end of each loop, we increment I by 1. I plus plus or plus plus I is essentially saying I equals I plus 1, or I plus equals 1. I plus plus or plus plus I is pretty much universal across all programming languages, shorthand for increment this variable by exactly 1. So what this is.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you might see something like, let's say var r equals an array, and it has 1, 3. I know that's a 5. I don't care. It has an arbitrary number of variables inside it. If I were to say for var I equals 0, I is less than r dot length I plus plus, that would be a for loop which iterates 1 time for every element in the array. So if the array has 16 elements, everything that happens inside this for loop will happen 16 times. And what's useful here is that I can reference the variable I that I've created. So I can say ri, we could say var v equals array index of I. And each time it iterates through the loop, we get the next element in the array.
All right, so we do have a couple people turning in. Thank you for coming to the stream. The rest of this explanation will be on the VOD.
Yeah.
Please check it out if you're curious about how this works. We'll sort of carry through and finish answering the question. Okay, so to head back in. So inside the loop, we're doing a particular operation. This is a little bit complicated to explain. So rather than breaking down the exact code for it, I'll tell you the net result of it. So what we're doing is we're taking that big list of common skill IDs, and we're picking 3, right? And the way that I've set it up is that we're picking 3 at random, and we're picking 3 that don't repeat, right? And here's the reason why we would probably want to do it like this, right? So when that battle rewards comes up, when you are picking at random, right, you're seeing sort of this map.random, and then we're multiplying it by the length, right? That's how we can generate a random index in that array to reference. But because it's random, right, it's just like a roll of the die. you know how you can like on a d6, right, or like on a six-sided die, you can roll once and you roll one, and then you roll again and you can roll one again, right? We don't necessarily want these values to be repeating because we want to show three different options for the player to have like a meaningful selection, right? Kind of between them. And so that's why we're doing it like this, right? Where we're trying to get three separate numbers, right? I'm using the splice operation here because that way I'm guaranteed that the next time, the next iteration of the loop, I know that the next ID that I get will not repeat because I've taken out the previous element, right? Um, so you can think of this like a box, and it contains 5 marbles in it, and I want to get 3 of them out, right? So the first time I go through, I like stick my hand in, I pick out 1, right? There are 4 marbles left. So the next time I go and pick from it, there will be 3 left, and then the next time there will be 2 left. And now I've got my 3 marbles. I don't care about the rest of the things in that box. And so that's all this operation is doing, is it's making that selection.
Also, I apologize for all of the changes that I have made to this code.
It's to make it more readable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So that's still here. Okay. Okay, so let's move on along, right? So the basic idea of that for loop, right, is that we're just picking three non-repeating random IDs, right? So we have this next array. We declare a const. This is a constant. It's slightly different from a variable. JavaScript allows us to change constants, which makes no sense to me. But sometimes your data needs to be formatted in as a constant as opposed to a variable. This is one of those cases, right? So here, what we do is we're taking the reward pool, and we're going through each element, and we're grabbing the names based on the ID, right? So the reward pool right now contains 3 skill IDs, right? So we're checking with data skills, what is that skill, right? We're basically asking it, hey, what is that skill? And can you give me the name of that skill? And we're putting those into this new constant called array. Right? We're using a function called map here. That effectively does what that for loop does for each element, right? Within reward pool. Okay, so that sort of takes care of it for the selection part of the process. Now we got to use a selection, right? So the first way that we use a selection, and many of you have used this for your game projects, I've seen, we're going to use show card to show those 3 cards that we have selected. We're using a for loop again to show those 3 because we know that there's going to be 3 elements in reward pool. And we're doing game map.interpreter.showCard in order to take the skill IDs and be able to draw those cards onto the screen. So I think a good way to kind of demonstrate this would be, what's the way that, Isaiah, if you could jump back into the game project and make a one edit. So go to the startup event on the demo island map. So close the database. Go to the top corner. Yeah. And then at the very end, like scroll down. Yeah. Call the common event battle reward combo. Okay. And then just jump into the game. Okay, so as you can see, we have 3 cards that we are drawing to the screen, right? And in the choice list, we have a list of names, and those names correspond exactly to the cards that we've drawn onto the screen. Let's go back to the code, right? So here we have the names, which are put into array. We will use that later. Then we have this for loop that goes through the reward pool, and it draws it using show card, it'll draw those to the screen. The things that follow it, right? There's 250 plus 160, 160. Those are coordinates, right? So it knows exactly where to draw these cards onto the screen.
Yeah. So this is
So
the x coordinate.
this is the x
This is the y
coordinate.
coordinate.
This is the y coordinate.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So the next thing we have is game message.add, and we say reward time. Which card would you like to add? Where have you guys seen this before? Let's go back to the game. Hey, it's right there, right? So many of you probably use this in your game projects, and if not, this is the way that you can do it. When you game message is a global variable, but basically it allows you to push messages onto the screen, right? Like in that like message window kind of format, right? So all I'm doing is telling it, hey, here's a string that I would like to show, and then I'm telling it, can you add it to the next game message that would show up? Is that correct?
yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
perfect.
Okay. So there's one thing that we have to do, and this is an inclusion that I believe I don't think they were a patron, but I think they were somebody on the server. They asked, hey, what if I don't want to pick a card, right? So what I've done is I've added to array skip reward, right? So if you go back to the game, you will notice that that is the fourth choice on the list, right? Which is skip reward. Okay. All right. So the next couple of things, right, after skip reward, I think if you could add a paragraph after skip reward.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So these next couple of lines are there to set up the choice, right? This actually requires multiple function calls. I don't know why. Average Maker makes it this complicated. But essentially, I'll break them down function call by function call. The first one is what are the choices, right? And how would you like to take the feedback, right? So if you remember previously, we had this constant called array. We had put the names of the skills that we're rewarding into into this array. So now we're giving it the set choices to be like, hey, can you create a choice menu that has these elements? All right. Next up, we're doing the choice background. There's three options for this, and you'll probably run into this if you have created a message. 0 usually corresponds to just show the window as is. 1 is to dim the thing, so there's sort of a half transparency, and 2 is to just pull like 0, like the opacity, right? It's transparent. Okay. The next we have is position type. I believe this corresponds to whether it is left, right. No. This position type would be whether it is on the top of the screen, the middle of the screen, or the bottom of the screen. Okay. Right? So we are essentially just setting up the way that this choice message would show up. The net result of this is, if I say, if you could go back to the game, is this setup, right? So we have reward time on the bottom of the screen. We have the choices, right? The choices are have the names, and then they also have skip reward within them. And then that last function, if you go back to the code, is set choice callback. So what this does is, based on which of our choices that we pick, right, it'll record the value of it, right? And it's not going to record the name of it. It's going to record what was the position on the choice window that the selection was made, okay? And that's what's going into n. And this is the thing that we're saving into that variable 3 that we had set to -1 at the very beginning of this.
Okay.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So this is
the
first part of that.
The variable 3.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I would like to throw it to chat. Have we lost you, or are you still following so far?
And should we speed
up?
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that I really hope I'm not sounding like I'm condescending to folks. I don't mean it, right? Like I just don't know what the level of code expertise is in chat. Okay, all right. You're still awake. I think it might have been Isla saying night 2, I faded. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, Reiko's still following. Fantastic. All right. All right. So the next part of the code, and so this is if you go back to the common event, okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the common event, if you go to battle reward common, right? Yeah, we sort of separate these out, right? So we went over that the first block. Now we're generating the choice list based on the actors in the party. Um, so in the demo project, there's a couple cases that we have to sort of be aware of. You could either just be playing as Harold, or you could be playing as a party of any size, right? And so if you're just playing as Harold, I know who to give the card to. But if you're playing as a party, right, like a custom party of any size, I don't know who to give the card to. So I need to create another choice list so that you can select whose deck this card will go into, right? This battle reward, right? That's all that's happening in there. I'm not going to break it down into specifics because it's honestly very similar to that choice that we saw earlier, right? We are grabbing the names of the party members. So something that might be useful, Isaiah, is if you go into the game. Oh, you have a party, like a party list of one.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if it works this way. Could you go into the console and like add on another member? This is so dumb. Add actor like 2. Okay, and then if you select a card, okay, fantastic. It does in real time. This is one of the best things about JavaScript. So Isaiah just added Therese to the party. And so now it is generating a choice list because, hey, there's 2 people in the party. Who do you want to give focus to? Right? That's all that's going on here. So how do we do this? Well, we're using game party, which is a global variable that contains a bunch of like cool like functions and information that allows us to get the status of the party, right? And what we're doing is we're grabbing who's alive in the party. This is so that we don't teach the card to a dead party member. I think the reason I went about this is that I don't think you can learn skill a dead party member. I think it stops you if you like. It doesn't crash, but like it doesn't actually let you give it to a dead party member.
Oh, that's
I
weird.
would need to check, but I think that's why I had set it to alive members. Because like previously I was just grabbing all the members, and then one of the party members died, and then I was just like, oh, why is this card not in their deck? Turns out it was because of this.
Okay.
This step may not be necessary, right? But like it was it's done sort of as a safety. Okay, and then there's an if statement. So many of you have dealt with conditional statements before. We're taking members, right, and we're grabbing the sort of length of that array, and we're seeing, hey, is there only one member in the party, or if there's multiple? If there's only one member in the party, then variable 7 is set to 0 because we know that we're defaulting to whoever is the 0th member in the party. But if there's more than one member in the party, then variable 7 is set to whoever you select, right, in that choice list. All right. So moving on along, the last part, right, is actually giving the skill to whoever we've selected. And so we need the 2 variables that we've set up for this, right? We need the skill ID, the reward that has been chosen, that we saved in variable 3 earlier. And then we need who in the member of the party we're giving it to, which we had saved in variable 7 earlier. So the first thing that we check is that, hey, are we getting a valid, right, value? If we had gotten -1 before, then it wouldn't process this this part of the thing, and it sort of tells me that something has gone horribly wrong, right? I need to take a look at this and fix it, right? What it doesn't allow to happen is learning the skill at -1 position, right? Which will almost certainly create a crash. I believe that's correct.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so inside this inside this conditional, we are learning the skill, right? So we are taking the game party, we're grabbing the member at chosen party ID, right? Which is whichever position that they're at, right? Notice that we're not grabbing them by ID, we're not grabbing them by name. It's just whoever is at that position, right, is the person that we care about. And then we are making them learn the skill that we had selected earlier, right? Which will add it to their deck using card game combat. right? The last part is, Isaiah, if you go back to the game, and let's say you select Therese or Harold, it'll be this, right? Which is this is a bit of UI feedback, which says, hey, focus was added to Harold's step, right? And so in order to do that, we have to sort of format this game message in order to show it like that. It looks a little bit wonky, but all of that is a string, right? Because it turns out that a string is, you can do math operations to it effectively, right? Isaiah, how do you explain concatenation of strings?
Oh man.
Oh man.
Well,
So
you can think of it like links in a chain, essentially, right? Like you have like the first part of a word, and then you connect it up with another part of a word. That's all that's happening when you like the plus in between that. Isaiah, do you have a good example?
May I?
Yeah, take over.
So when you add 4 plus 6, it says 10. But if you were to add 4 plus, actually I don't know if this is going to resolve because JavaScript is stupid. So if you add a string containing the number 4 and a string containing 6, it combines the two strings. So I could say test plus string equals test string. Now it does not add a space between them, so I might want to do test space close parentheses plus string, and that will combine the two. So in this case, what we have is we have a card and then a code letting you know to change the color of the string. And then we add a game variable, and you'll notice we have a space before and after this game variable. And then we have another variable that we sort of add to the end. And then we don't have a space here so that there isn't like a weird space between Harold's name and the apostrophe S. I hope that explanation was
satisfactory.
Yeah, chat, let us know whether that makes sense. But the way that you can think about this is, I don't know if you we have people from around the world, so I don't know if necessarily everybody did the same sort of exercises in school. But I know in the US it's called Mad Libs, right? But this is, you can think of this as sort of a fill in the blanks kind of exercise, right? So we've created sort of the skeleton of a sentence, but we don't know until we get to that sentence what is the card that is being given and who it is being given to. So the way that we format the string is to leave those blanks, and then the variables will have that information for us. So when we go to actually add the message, we can add those in. Yeah, Isaiah, I think that's exactly the way that we want to format, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of the sort of dynamic text stuff that you'll be seeing in games, right? Anywhere where, let's say you're playing an RPG and you get to create your character's name, right, at the very beginning of the game. The dialogue in the game, by and large, doesn't know what kind of name you've come up with. Instead, what it does is that there'll be a space for where the name should be, right? And then it'll incorporate that within the sentence. This allows you to do very childish things for older games, right, who are using the system, where you can put like swear words, right? You can put like something dumb, right, in that blank, and the game is okay with it because all it is doing is it is substituting that blank with what is in the variable.
And then,
right? And so the last bit, it's just a bit of feedback once again, which is we're playing a sound effect to sort of clue the player into the fact that a change happened. This is not necessary. You don't need this if you're setting this up on your end. But I usually think it is good to pair anytime something in a game changes that the player cares about, to have either audio or visual or both have that feedback kind of available. Different games have different philosophies about this, but it is generally good to have this Exactly. Yeah. No, Reiko, you have it exactly correct. Yeah. And so yeah, well, all we're doing there is we're telling the audio manager, hey, can you play Ice 5, which is a sound effect that comes with RPG Maker, at this volume at this pitch. So we've already learned about objects. What you may have noticed is that we're giving the audio manager an object right there. Isn't that right there?
Yeah.
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 Sorry, I'm trying to wait to start speaking until enough time for you to disable your microphone so that the feedback doesn't happen. But yeah, so play sound effect is a function which requires taking in an object, just because it is looking for specific, I'll call them subvariables, specific data members, with the name for the name of the sound effect, volume and pitch, and then there's also one which is pan to determine like where in the stereo that it's doing. Neil, should I look for this exact function, or do you think that would be overwhelming?
Let's put it to the chat. So we've come to the end of like how to set up one of these battle reward functions. So I think the first thing I would like to put is that, is this clear? Do you have any questions on any part of this process? And if it is, then would you like to sort of see a little bit behind the scenes of how RPG Maker is handling this sort of script call stuff that we're doing?
Let me show you the code. And we've got a bit of latency, so expect there to be a delay between our ask and their answer.
Yeah, no worries. Gives us time to kind of rest up a bit.
It's pretty clear. I think I need to do it on my own just to be sure. That makes total sense. Well, and I will say all of the code, though not commented and not as prettily formatted, is all present in the demo. Even though I have changed. Okay.
So one thing we may want to do, I think, is that let's say save this, right, and then just make it available on the Discord, right?
Okay.
Yeah. That way, like, if people want to review it, because I know like annotated code is like often like easier to go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, definitely can do. I'm going to just real quick look at audiomanager.playSoundEffect, that function. Something that I like about Visual Studio and RPG Maker together is RPG Maker always formats their like they have a specific formatting standard they use whenever they define a function. They'll say equals function, and then they'll have different parameters, etc., etc. I've seen some plugin developers omit the spaces, but RPG Maker never does. So if I say audiomaker.playSoundEffect and then a space after that, when I like try and search for the function, I will always find the definition of the function, because any other call of the function will have no space at the immediate end of the function. So in order to play a sound effect, it intakes a variable which contains a name, and then it also contains create buffer. Sorry, I don't know if I should be swearing on this stream, but I forgot that it was really convoluted with Audio Manager.
Yeah. I think we've seen beyond the veil, right? We're looking at the sort of the horror of the madness, right? That is RPG Maker beyond the scenes. It's not that bad. I used to think that like this was impossible to parse, and I'm an utter dumbass, right? It makes a lot more sense now, right? You just need to sort of work with it a little bit. If
I want to look at what create buffer does, we we can see it takes a folder. Hold on. What were the parameters that were being called?
So it was so it's SE, and then it's the format is name, pitch, and then volume.
Yeah. So the folder determines which audio folder it's looking for. If I go through, I want to go to audio. We can see that's essentially which of these. Here, let me just real quick. I don't think I can. No, I can't zoom in. I can. Well, the text isn't any larger, but anyway, those are the 4 folders for audio, and those are, the string containing one of those folders. It's what's passed in this function, and then the name of the file, and then it returns depending on if we're using HTML5. This is some back end stuff, but it will return the basics of an audio file based on knowing where to look for it. That's what this function does.
As if you scroll up a bit, it actually defines what an audio object is.
Oh, snap.
Yeah. So that's what an empty audio object is. But like, notice that even above it, there's audio manager.save BGS, and look at how it's formatting the return, right? Name BGS.name, volume BGS.volume, pitch BGS.pitch, right? Yeah. So essentially, it's the thing that we were talking about with variables, right? It is just formatting a bunch of useful information that something else needs down the line, right?
I think we should use this as a way to talk about how functions work.
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
So, because we've talked about functions for a little bit. We've gone over a couple of functions that maybe were slightly more advanced than what we should have gone over. That's all fine. If I want to say, I'm going to say var foo equals function. Now you'll notice var foo, that's a variable. But it's a variable which does not contain a number. It does not contain a string. It technically contains an object, but that's what it contains is a function. And this is amazing because in an RPG Maker, I can define the function to do something, and then later I can call the function by using the parentheses. But then I can also say, I can redefine it. I can give it do something else. And I can do that because it's not just a function, it's a variable which contains a function. And just like I can say R4 equals 6 and then later say R4 equals 7, I can do the exact same thing with a variable which contains a function. And that's the basics of how plugins work, where plugins will take a function in RPG Maker and then they will make that function do something else. So we're getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves here, which is something that I have been doing all stream. So the function will do something like, let's say console.log hello. And actually, let me write this in the console itself. So if I say var foo equals function, and then I call foo, it has added hello to the log. Console.log is a function which displays something in the console, which is very useful for finding out where the hell your code has gone wrong. So I'll say var foo2 equals function, and then instead of just blank parentheses, I'll say argument. And I'm shift entering here so that I can submit multiple lines at the console. And then I'll say console.log argument. Now what this is doing is if I say foo2 and I don't supply anything inside the parentheses, it'll just console log undefined. But if I say hello, Oops, I said food instead of food too.
food instead of food too.
Man, you're really hungry.
I got food on the brain. So this argument here, this is what we call a function parameter. So it's whenever you call a function, it is extra information that you supply at like inside the parentheses of your function. So I can create a variable, var foo_var equals string var whatever, and then I can say foo2 foo_var, and it prints string var. So those are have some dinner after the stream. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. So we have the variable name, or we have the function name, we have the parameters. Now there's one more component of a function, and that is the return value. So if I say, I'm going to refresh all of this and say var foo equals function number. Let me call this add. I'll say number 1, number 2. Now what I can do is I can say return number 1 plus number 2. The world's least efficient adding system is, instead of just straight up adding them, we call a function which adds the numbers, right? So if I were to say var final number equals add 5 and 11, we can see that final number is 16. So what all of this does is, if I call the function and then supply the variables, it runs through all of this function, and then when it finds this return statement, it finishes this function and then puts all of that into whatever is this assignment operator to the left.
So something that you all may have noticed is that whenever we have typed something into the console log, even if it has worked, the console will write undefined after it. This is because of the return value, right? Most functions don't necessarily need a return value, right? And so by default, right, like they're going to return undefined, right? But a function like add has a return, has a return value. So Isaiah, just try add like 5, 11, or like something else. Yeah, and then there we go. We get 18. Similarly, if you do console.log here, right, like within the console, and then and so you get hello. So the hello that console.log is writing, right? That's not the return. Rather, that is the thing that it told the console to do, right? But console.log on its own doesn't have return value, right? Which is why the console is going to write out undefined. So if you do see when you're calling things in the console and you're seeing undefined, that doesn't mean it doesn't work, right? What that means is that you're using a function that, even if it's doing its thing, doesn't output a value, and that's fine. Some functions just work like that.
Now there's one other thing about the return statement. So if I were to say console log goodbye, if I were to run this function foo, you would never see the console log reading out goodbye. And that is because as soon as it gets to the return statement, it stops. It says, oh, it's time for me to return? Okay, I will return. So I'm just no longer interested in whatever is over here. And that can lead to situations where I might say, if argument is greater than 5, return 0. And so if argument is greater than 5, then we'll return 0. And if it's not greater than 5, then we'll continue and we'll read this. And if I don't have another return value at the end here, then it's just going to return undefined by default. So if you ever have a return value inside of an if statement, it's good practice to always have a default return value at the end of the function.
So Reiko has brought up a fairly good point, right? Which is that you always need to check out a function like works, right? Whether it returns or not. So there is a way that with the console you can actually check that. So JavaScript is nice enough that if we a good example of this would be Isaiah. I think type in like game party members, but leave out the braces. Yeah. So in the console, you can ask it things like this, and it'll just give you what the definition of that function, right? There might be more particulars to it, but broadly, functions kind of boil down into this, right? Yeah, and so if you just ask it without the braces, right, it will not call the function. It won't do the actual thing. But if you add the braces after, and if you add especially those arguments, right, that Isaiah put in, that's how you will get the return value kind of from it. So if you ever need to check, hey, this is a function that seems to be coming up. What does it do? You can just ask the console like that.
There are circumstances in which it might not give you a very useful answer. Like you can see here, it actually calls 3 different functions to determine. It actually calls 3 different functions to determine like what it's supposed to do, and that's fine. Like I can say, what does gameparty.inBattle mean? Like what does that return? Oh, it returns a variable called inBattle. I should stop double clicking on it. But you might find a situation where, let me find, I'm going to search through my own plugin for a second, and I'm just going to go to, okay, so scene battle create display objects, right? If I were to say, hey, what does this say? So it's going to tell me the version of the function that I've defined, and it might not show the original function because the original function is stored inside a variable that you will have to access separately. So if you have like a lot of plugins or an especially powerful plugin, like something that just as a weird example turns your combat into a card game, this might not necessarily be a completely reliable method of finding out what the original function does, because you have people who are taking the original function and modifying it in a way that might not necessarily be super readable to the console.
And to link it back to sort of what we started with initially, this is all plugins are.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
Right. Like this is what plugins do. Is that we're taking the existing function, the base of functions that RPG Remaker has, and we are saying that your version is cool, but what if it did this? Right. Sometimes you have to define new classes, new objects, right, new functions on top of that. And for example, for Card Game Combat, Isaiah has had to do that multiple times.
Yes.
Yeah.
But for the most part, this is what a plugin does when you put it into the plugin manager, right? And this is also why the order of the plugins in the plugin manager matters, right? Because it will only take the most recent version of a function. So let's say 3 different plugin developers are changing the same function. Let's say we're changing create display objects, right? The scene battle create display objects. Let's say Yanfly is changing that. Let's say SRD is changing that. Let's say Isaiah is changing that. Which version will the client end up going with? It'll be whoever is last in the order. Or I think Isaiah, is there a way to like hard set precedents?
There's a way to preserve the original one.
Yeah.
So what I'm about to show you is Neil, if you could, So what I'm about to show you is the way that most programmers will overwrite functions. So if I wanted to, let's pretend for a second that this line of code didn't exist. If I wanted to create a new scene battle, create display objects, and I wanted it to do everything that the original one did plus my own stuff, then I might want to copy all of this code and then paste it let's say right here. And so now it does everything that it does originally, but it also does a couple extra things, and it does a couple extra things, right? And that's great for me, but it's not great if you want to use Card Game Combat and any other plugin that calls this function, because now this original function doesn't exist. I'm doing the same things that it's doing, but it's not quite the same function. So what I do instead is I say, okay, I have access to the original function before I've overwritten it, before I've redefined it. I'm going to store that in a new variable whose name just happens to be very similar to make it extremely organizable. So if I were to type Isaiah CGC scene battle create display objects into the console, sorry, I meant to say copy, not save. If I were to type that into the console, then it should show me exactly the same code that you can see on the right here, which is what the original code is. So I have access to the original function. And so I have my version of the function do some things, and then it calls the original function, and then it does some extra things. And what's nice about that is that if I do that, but I do that after Yanfly changes what the original function is, then what I'm actually copying is not the original function, but Yanfly's modified function. And if I need to access the original function, but I know that you're using Yanfly, then I can find what the name of the variable that Yanfly used to store the original function and call that one instead. So we have this sort of history of how the function has been changed, and everybody has access to the version that existed before them. And so that way we never lose access to the original function. No matter how many plugins deep we are, up until somebody decides that they don't want to include this line of code, and then we've completely lost the chain.
It was SRD.
It was. It's always
say
SRD.
It's not always SRD, but like one of the most egregious examples of that has been SRD.
Yeah, I think some of his earliest plugins were not good about this. This is very much like a standard. This is one of those things that everybody at this point in time agrees that this is the way that you should write this code. But in 2014, there was no such standard. We got to hear from there through blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
And
okay,
a
cool.
bunch of plugins that didn't play nice together.
Yeah, and when you're all working on your game projects, right, and you're putting in plugins and you run into a crash, right? This is what is happening, right? Essentially, two different plugins are usually trying to work in the same space, right? And they don't know, because the plugins are usually written independently of each other, right? So they don't know the other exists until that function is called, right? And then we have a problem, right? Because sometimes one plugin is doing one thing with that function, another plugin is doing another thing, and this is where compatibility error usually exists. Not always, right? But this is a very common thing that happens.
All right.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So I think this is as deep as we should get code-wise, right?
Yeah,
I think that
I agree.
Honestly, we may have gone into the deep end a little bit too quickly. So I do want to apologize to folks in chat. Hopefully, this makes more sense when you go back through it. So I think that okay, all right. Isla is taking up the line. Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
So yeah, so I think it'll just be Reiko and chat for now. Reiko, do you have any specific questions or things that you would like us to kind of illustrate, or do you kind of just want us to kind of do our thing, show the material that we have prepared?
It's funny. Yesterday, YouTube was recommending a bit rate of 1000, and now it's like, hey, 1000's too low. You got to raise that.
Darn. All right.
So I'm just gonna real quick raise that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So in that case, should we move towards the concluding portion of the stream, or
Yeah, I think, I mean, as much as I want to like go into how to make windows and create an original class and all of that, and I do really want to do all of that. Actually, before we move on, I think I want to do one more thing in the realm of code and plugins, and that's just create a new plugin from scratch. So I'm gonna say var test function equals function, and I'm gonna say console log hello world. And that's going to be all that the plugin is going to do. So I'm going to save it, and I'm going to save that to wherever the heck I have this this project saved. And I'm going to vamp until I get there by talking very slowly.
I mean, so Reiko posted in chat, there are a bunch of things that want us to commit to memory and keep noted down to remember what they are in order to search for word. Yeah, that's totally fair. We will try to be, if it helps folks, we'll be a little less freeform with it. We are currently we are currently, I guess, trying to understand where our viewers will largely be at code-wise, right? And then based on that, we can determine exactly the order in which we focus on things, if that makes sense. All right.
It looks like that didn't save properly, but I don't understand why.
Mm-hmm. Did script 1 save at least?
It's going to. I'm gonna make it save.
So Isaiah, I think it might be because it's running.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Try it now.
File is currently in use and cannot be overwritten. I've genuinely never seen this before. Of course, it has to happen while we're on stream.
Yeah. So try shutting off the project.
Like closing this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now there shouldn't be any dependencies, right?
Save script 4 as test. What the heck?
Okay. All right. So Visual Studio is misbehaving, which is cool. So we're just gonna do a low tech backup, which is, I think, just have Notepad out there ready and just copy over script1.js.
Yeah.
Over to it. Yeah.
So I'm going to var test func equals new function, and this will say console.log hello world, and this is like a great demonstration of how you can use any text editor
in order to create a plugin.
Yeah.
So the very important thing when you're creating a plugin, even on Notepad, is to make sure that you save it as a JS file. This is critically important.
Yeah. So I don't know how well you can see, but I've got Isaiah test.js in here. Now that that's saved,
hey, Nick.
let me reboot
RPG
Maker. So now if I go into the plugins, I've got a plugin called Isaiah Test. Oh my god, the Steam overlay is not my favorite in RPG Maker. So, because I've created, it's just a function called testfunc. But if I go into the console and I say First of all, it just tells me hello world immediately. But if I call test func, all right, we're gonna go over this next time, because
Okay.
because I'm
Yeah, I
very
think.
tired. And
I think that's very clear.
yeah,
Okay, so yeah, I think we're good on that. Do you have any energy to show off stuff, or
yeah,
do you want to
I
kind of
think we
call it
should.
and end of day? Okay, so
Partially because it'll be
for the
50%
last,
you.
yeah, okay. So for the last sort of section, so we did open up the. So one thing that we would probably want to do is could you set up OBS to capture audio on that?
So it should be capturing audio.
Okay, all right, sweet, all right, that's fantastic.
It's
I mean,
it's
pretty
only
great,
you who
right?
can't see the audio.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, so we did open the floor up for legendary patrons to submit their project. They haven't taken it, which is fine. Everybody has a project that's sort of in development, right? But we want to sort of open this up to be sort of not just a showcase of what the project can do, but also, hey, even if a project is like half done, right, you're allowed to show it. So I wanted to show off one of the ones that I made using Card Game Combat. It's a asymmetric strategy game called Rebel Sector. Isaiah, feel free to launch into it. Okay. So this is a game where the setup is that you're in a galaxy. Maybe you're in a galaxy far, far away. But yeah, basically you were part of a republic that was living fairly peacefully, right? Certain political things changed, and now the empire is here, and they're here to stay. So you are trying to lead a group of insurgents in order to take back your home. And so it takes place over essentially a distribution of 5 planets, right? There's a central planet, which is sort of the capital of your system, and then there are planets that are on the fringes that where people still live, right? Where things are still useful, but they're considered less important by the empire. Right? And so the goal is for you to lead your rebels, right, in order to take over the planets, and whoever reaches sort of 4 kind of control points, it's very board gamey in that way. Will be able to sort of seize control kind of off the sector, right, for sort of years to come. So the way that this game works is that you have resource cards in your hand. Some of those resources are recruits, which are people who are sympathetic to the cause, who will be willing to do the work for the rebellion on these planets. So Isaiah, go ahead and like add a rebel to a planet. Yeah, and so these rebels have names, right? So for example, if you add like another rebel, let's say to another spot. Yeah, and so up in the battle log, you see that they have a name, and then it shows that they've joined the planet, right? And they're sort of they've been stored there, right? So whenever an operation happens on the planet, they might be somebody that's involved. So whenever you put a recruit onto a planet, that increases the sort of blue number on the planet, and that is the number that will be sort of used to contest the sort of imperial presence. The other important thing is resources, right? So you have this provision card. So Isaiah, try putting it on any planet of your choice. Okay, and you should now be able to set up a camp on that planet. The camp is useful because it essentially trains the local population to join the rebellion. Okay. So with this last card, Isaiah, just play it anywhere. Okay. And so when you end your turn, sort of control of this sector is kind of contested, and we do it planet by planet, right? So the number of rebels matches sees if it can beat the number of Imperials, and then sort of based on that, right, the control of the planet will go in one direction.
Now, not much happened, specifically because I made sure that the blue numbers matched the red numbers.
Yeah.
Because I started out losing in all categories, and I wanted to make sure that I did not.
Yeah. And so here, what you see every turn, you have a selection of cards to buy from. This would have been useful to show Isilla, because this is what a weighted distribution looks like for that sort of card selection choice. The first two cards will always be resource cards, right? So the first slot is always for recruits. The second slot is always for provisions, because those are the main bread and butter, right, of every rebellion. And then the next three cards are what are called operations. These can do a variety of different things, right? And you sort of build your deck around one of the strategies of these, right? So Isaiah, for instance, I think maybe just grab like a recruit card for now, so we can show the control contesting. But the idea is that whenever you buy a card from a slot, that slot slowly is going to upgrade, right? And so later on down the line, you're going to get more powerful cards from that kind of category. They make a couple of these moves, right?
I'm just we don't necessarily need supply anywhere in particular, so I'm just putting it, I'm stratifying it.
Yeah. And so the one thing we will see this turn is that the central planet, the rebels will start winning, right? They sort of identified that the empire is corrupt, right, or that they're sort of holding down the citizens, right? And so the cause is kind of moving, and that's the kind of game it is, right? Where you are trying to, you're not just trying to win like a military victory. You're trying to sort of enable the people that live there, right, to be able to kind of determine for themselves. Right? And so there's many different strategies, many different things that you can do. I think Isaiah, play until the empire does an action, and then we'll look at the database to see how you can set something like this up, right? If you wanted to. Right now, Isaiah's adding just a bunch of recruits, right, to a planet. There's not that much art in this game, right? And this is intentional, right? Like, I would, even if your game projects don't necessarily have like a bunch of cool art or animations, feel free to show them off, right? So long as like the core concept is kind of coming forward. Yeah, and so there's different kinds of victories. It's if you played any of the 4X games like Civilization, right, Stellaris, right? There's a cultural victory component. There's a military victory, right? But every couple of rounds, the empire starts to reinforce their position within the sector, right? So they set troops down on this planet, and then they play sort of a big card, right? And so this one's particularly a vicious one. Right? They're purging the dissidents, right? So they are kind of making sure that the rebels on each planet, right? Right, there's essentially one of them that is ousted kind of every turn. Right? That can be particularly brutal, right? So you sort of need to prepare around this bigger foe, right? That you need to go by. So yeah, that's Rebel Sector. I think it's pretty cool. This is made with card game combat, and I say, why don't we take a look at what that looks like?
Absolutely.
On the back end. Yeah. So so first, let's actually take a look at the plugin manager.
Yes.
So the big thing I want to stress is that all of these plugins are freely available, other than Card Game Combat. And Card Game Combat, if you're in this stream, you probably have it. If not, it is available to buy on our pitch page. This is where we probably do like a sponsor link. But note that we have the Amplify plugins. We have a good number of them. The biggest Amplify plugin that is being used, and the one that I would highly recommend because it works really well with Card Game Combat, is one called Buff States 4. Right? Buff States 4 adds a bunch of features to how RPG Maker deals with states. And the biggest one that we're using currently is this feature called a state counter. So now let's take a look at the database, and I'll sort of explain what we're doing with that.
I'm trying to find the state counter.
It's like all the way at the bottom.
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the first thing we want to show is actually troops before we go into states. Yeah. So this is what the entire game looks like. It is one battle. That's it, right? It is one battle. The planets are enemies. So if you go into enemies, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So if you go into enemies, right, you will see that, hey, we have the planets, right? They have all kinds of fancy names, right? And the way that we're tracking control is by changing their HP, right? So when the rebels win, they heal HP, right? And when the empire win, they struggle. They lose HP. The big change that we've had to make is that when one side controls a planet, the enemy doesn't die, right? That's really the only change that has been made to how sort of the base RPG Maker kind of works, right? And so there's a couple things that we're doing here in Notepad. We're giving it a bunch of passive states, right? So the passive states like 12, 13, 15, and 16, those correspond to, Isaiah, if you go back to the game.
Oh, to the game.
Yeah. Those correspond to the 4 numbers that are next to each planet, right? Previously, if you had seen that, for example, Isaiah, if you play a recruit on a planet, the blue number increases, right? And so that corresponds to the total number of rebel operators that are on the planet. The green number corresponds to the number of supplies that are on the planet, which you can add to the provision card, right? And on the Imperial side, we have the red number, which is the number of Imperial sort of troops on the planet. And then this yellow number, which is called alert, which increases every time that there is rebel activity on a planet, right? You saw that bar increase and then kind of change. So each action that you do on a planet is going to raise their suspicion, and when their time comes to reinforce, they will be like, oh, there's a bunch of rebel activity there. We should focus our troops over there, right? That kind of thing. So let's go back to the database.
Sorry, I just started playing again and got excited.
Which is good. It's doing the thing. So notice that there's a state resist knockout in the traits. This is in order to make sure that when a planet reaches HP 0, all that means is that the planet is under Imperial control, but that's not forever, right? You can take back, the rebels can take back control if they play their cards right, right? And so we have to put 2 things. One is no disappear under the collapse effect, and 2 is that there's a state resist for knockout, right? So these planets don't die. The last important thing about the planets is that they actually do process their turn just as an enemy, and they do a skill. I'm leaving the skill blank so that it doesn't show up in the battle log, but this is where the sort of math is happening to compare the rebels versus the Imperials, right? And to do that damage pop-up and things like that. Okay, so with all that said, let's actually take a look at the states.
At the states.
We can, yeah. Okay, so if you remember those state IDs, 12, 13, 15, and 16, you will see that 12 is rebels, 13 is Imperials, 15 is supplies, and 16 is alert. All of these are very simple things because all they do is they track a number, and that number is a state counter, right? So in the node tags, all we do is say, hey, this one state counter is set to 0 at the start of a battle. And then if you go into skills right there, let's take a look at recruit.
At recruit, okay. I was like, do we want to scroll all the way down to 61?
No. That might be too complicated. But if you go scroll into recruit, so this is using gameplay action sequences, right? So we got to do some setup action thing. But all this card does is in this whole action portion, which is we add 1 to the state counter, which is for state 12, which is rebels, right? So we've added 1 rebel to a planet. Most of the game works like this, right? We are either adding a number, or we're subtracting a number, or we're moving a number around. So it's actually like on the gameplay end, it's like fairly simple to kind of put together, right? I can actually very easily make new cards kind of for this game because it just works kind of on this system. And you will be able to do it too. So let's say that you wanted to implement, like, you want to do a Slay the Spire like game, you want to do block, right? I highly recommend using buff state score in order to do that, right? Because essentially all the states do is they track your variables for you, and you now know which variables which state to look for in order to modify those variables. And the Yamfly has set up a very nice like counter in front of a state, which you can configure in the plugin parameters to change it to sort of your needs, right? Which is all we're doing here, right? There's like small modifications that I've made, right, to the way that like the state icons show up, but for the most part, you can do most of the changes you want to make in your game with just, hey, here's a state, it's a state counter, and then anytime you make an action, You check, do I have the state? Okay, I will modify the counter like this.
Yeah, this is actually wild because I definitely, like, when you first showed me this game, I was like, I have no idea how you could possibly accomplish something like this. But it really is, when you break it down, it really is just a very simple, very clever use of like state counters. Like that's fundamentally all that it is.
Yeah, and it's why it's very easy to like iterate on cards, right? Because ultimately they're just pegged to these numbers, right?
Yeah.
There's a larger conversation to be had about like how you can design your games in a way that you can generate content for them faster.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to get into that today. I think that for the most part, when you're making your games with card game combat, you can set yourself up to sort of succeed a little bit, right? You can set up these sort of variables that you know you will be using, right? So let's say that you're making a game that's similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering, right? You know that you need an attack number, you need a defense number, right? And you need maybe the cost, right? So the cost we already take care of, right? That's usually the MP or the TP cost of the card. But if you need the power and toughness, right, or the attack and defense value, then you can do it through state counters. Right? That's a fairly easy way to do it. This is so that let's say that you have a card that summons an actor or summons an enemy onto the field. You can give them the states on spawn, right, to have those values, and then let's say that two monsters kind of fought each other. You just compare those values, and then you just handle the math, right? The way that you would do math, right? You don't need to do specific animations and things like that. At least not yet, right? This is a good way of prototyping your game. This will probably not be what the final game looks like. At least I hope not, right? I mean, it's interesting to me, right? Because I like spreadsheets, right? But I think to somebody who's, let's say, new and learning the game, right? This isn't the most approachable game. So I'll maybe next month when we do this dev stream, I'll have a better version of this event.
I fully plan on continuing to play this once the stream is over, just for the record.
I mean, stress test it, like, let me know what strategies work out, what don't. But yeah, this is the kind of game that I've always wanted to make, right? And like my goal is to keep pushing card game combat in weirder directions, right? So you all saw me making the Typing of the Dead style game, right? Where like the enemies approach and then you have the cards, right? That's one way to make the game, right? There's a rap battle game that I'm making with card game combat. So you might be able to see that in the future. So if you're a fan of the documentary 8 Mile, imagine if you're doing 8 Mile but in hell, right? Like it's demons who are rap battling against each other to become the next king of Pandemonium. And it's done through card game combat. Like
it's
so
a card game.
Simple. It's a card game, yeah.
This is literally so okay. So this is our dynamic. Is I like make a plugin and Neil makes 12 games using the plugin that it never would have occurred to me that you could make in my lifetime.
honestly, Reiko, you're joking. I will make a racing game. Like just suggest a game type to me. I'll figure out a means of sort of achieving that with card game combat. I know that I'm already working on like a mech action game, right? With card game combat. So I might show that at a later point.
Okay, but Tony Hawk card game specifically gives me some ideas for like trick combos.
Yeah, exactly, right? And especially because deck builders, right, are very good at letting people enjoy their deck, right? Letting them feel good about their combos, right? I think, that kind of game, like Tony Hawk Pro, or like a Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 game, which is sort of just like infinite play, just try to get like as long of a string as you can, right? So even though we have presented this as you can make a Slay the Spire type game, I would encourage everybody who is seeing the VOD, right, or even in chat, figure out something new, right? Cards are functionally infinite design space, right? So you can do so many things with them, and we can just create like all kinds of new experiences. And I really want to see what you guys come up with. So yeah. I think that's it.
Yeah, I
is
think
is this just gonna turn into a let's play of
honestly, yes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we could play this out, but yeah, I think that we're at the sort of end of the sort of material that we had prepared.
Yeah.
Feel free to stick around. We would love to hear your thoughts. I know Isaiah probably just wants to play the game for a bit and then do dinner. Reiko, I think don't sell yourself short. The game, at least like from the bits that you have had me take a look at, seems really interesting, right? Accelerate, like a bunch of people in the server are making even more cooler games than like what I've shown off here. It's not a competition. I think like we're just trying to see where this tool can take us, right? But yeah, we probably can. So good news is that I'll probably go back through and timestamp the section so that it'll be easier for people to scroll through, especially where we were going through the code plugin side stuff.
All right, so this is going considerably better than my last game. Because I've already taken the center. Oh, and then here comes the Imperial phase to ruin my day.
Yeah, and
right on cue.
The one thing about this game that I really wanted to make is that it's a play at your own pace type of game.
Yeah.
So if you want to take as long as you can, you can. If you want to play through it very quickly, if you like know all the cards, right, know the strategy, you can play through games in about 5 minutes. Yeah. You are doing considerably better, so I think give yourself some credit.
Oh man.
Got a lot of troops.
I do have a lot of troops, yeah.
The one thing to state is that they're not actually true. Right? Like they're just like people that are sympathetic to the cause.
Yeah.
So you all might see, Reiko, you're joking. Like I hope you're not, like freaking Project Moon, right? Isaiah, like I've told you about Library of Ruina. Project Moon just keeps making the coolest possible game, right? In what many would consider to be like the worst genre. So like you would put them in the gacha game category, but like that's absolutely not what they're doing, right? Every single game that they've made is amazing. Like Laboratory Corporation, Library of Ruina, they have a new one, right? Which like is more like in like a stalker-y kind of way, right? Stalker as in the Tarkovsky kind of film.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I am so impressed by these developers, and also their fan base is insane, right? Everybody is unhinged, right? Because everybody's like looking for like weird little clues that they hid in the mechanics or the music of their games. It's so good, Reiko. Like And again, I think Library of Ruina is a great example of like you really don't have to like tie yourself down to like the sort of standard format of deck builder, right? You can tell really compelling stories with it. You can just do wild stuff. They have cards that you play for characters, but they also have dice. And the action points are determined by total number of dice on a character.
Oh.
I don't know how else to explain it. And so so it seems like it would be really random. This is Library of Ruina, by the way. But essentially, when a matchup happens between an actor and enemy, right? Dice are rolled, and then based on the dice value, right, it resolves the rock paper scissors kind of thing, which seems highly random until you play the game, and then just makes perfect sense. Which is wild to me, right? Like they created such a chaotic system that still works. How's it going over there?
sorry, I'm so laser focused on this game.
Which is good, which is good, right? So you've taken the center, but
that's all I've taken.
Yeah, but the Empire is taking the fringe. Yeah.
I may have overcorrected a little bit from my last playthrough.
Which is fine. This is you gotta.
Damn. but
it
the
does
only
take
place
-1
I can-
supply, and
Yeah.
yeah. But one of the cool things is that if you have a gray market setup, it directly feeds into the forward base.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I have the markets proc before the rebels, and then the rebels proc before so there's a sort of order of operations, right?
Mhm.
That sort of happens, which is in the player's favor because everything else is against the player's favor.
Yes.
Right. The one thing I really do want to do is that I do want the Empire to select their big operation cards before the start of the game. So you can sort of, if you know what the Empire's deck is, right?
Mhm.
It'll only ever be like 10 cards. But if you know what their deck is, none of those cards will repeat, by the way. Right? So if they do like Purging the Dissidents, right? Or Defend the Center, right? Or if they do Hearts and Minds, right? They won't do it twice in the same game.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can sort of build a little bit around that, right? Yeah, Reiko, you brought up Battle Spirits before. That's one that I'm not as familiar with, but I know that like that has its own like community. What can you tell us about it? If you have some time. Meanwhile, on Isaiah's screen, math.
Man, the Imperial fucking.
It's almost as if I timed it to be the most inconvenient. Oh god, it's Hearts and Minds.
Oh no.
This is gonna suck, my man.
Yeah, it definitely is.
So Sabotage is probably your best card here.
Yeah.
Because Hearts and Minds does it's Imperial Protest essentially, right?
Mhm.
It's them running it's them running like, hey, you know, like we're here to sort of like fix up the troubles, right? We're doing sort of PR campaigns. Right? I really want to illustrate this game because I think that like we can get some.
Yeah.
So to tell you all a little bit about why the game is the way it is. For one, it's because I watched the newish Star Wars series Andor, and I was just like, I love this so much. I want to make this a game, right? But this game is made in the style of another CCG called Netrun. There's the pretty famous CCG that Richard Garfield, who also was responsible for the design for Magic: The Gathering. The second major CCG that he worked on, I believe, was called Netrunner. It was based off the Cyberpunk property that you all know now. And so Netrunner is this really fascinating game of one player being the hacker and the other player being the corporation. And their card pools are completely different. Their objectives are completely different, and they have to kind of work around each other in order to achieve the goals of the game. So the corporation is trying to push forward their agendas, right? They're setting up these operations in these servers. They're defending them with these like fancy intrusion countermeasures, right? They're doing things to earn themselves money, earn themselves public support, hunt down the hacker, right? That kind of thing. And then the hacker, who's called a runner, right? Their deck is more about like the programs that they're running on their machine, right? Favors that they can cash in, right? They can launch what is called a run on a server, right? Where they try to hack into a server. They have to break past the countermeasures, right? In order to steal the stuff that the corporation has, right? And sometimes the corporation can get sneaky with it. You can put a trap in a server, right? And then the runner spends like all of their resources breaking through ice, right? They're like, oh, what's under here? And then it's like, boom, here's damage to your brain, right? You can do these really cool bluffs and power plays kind of with that. Anyway, the idea of sort of asymmetric warfare, right, where the decks are completely different, is what inspired Rebel Sector, because you're playing the Rebel side of the game currently. There's an Imperial side to the game as well, and so my hope is that we get to flesh this out so that you can see what that is like as well. Because from the Empire's perspective, this is just one of many systems that they have to keep under control. And Isaiah is hooked.
I'm
He hasn't said a word.
I'm also I'm also not winning.
You are in far better of a position than last game.
Yeah.
You're ahead on rebels, which is the big thing that matters. Right, and also like your economy is just way better this game. So I honestly think you can put the next Empire action is gonna suck a bit, but other than that, I think.
The guys at the left have just been vibing for years.
Vibing is a way. It's certainly a word for it. Yeah.
Finally retaking the center.
Yeah.
I had the center, lost it so quickly.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, here they come. So the good news is sometimes when you give up on a planet, right? Like the Empire, like they're dumb, they're big and dumb. They put, oh, okay, we're just going down again. But I honestly think that they're not going to be fast enough, right? Yeah, I think you got this. Man.
Draw 4, erase 2. I don't love draw 4, erase 2, but.
So erase 2 is specifically to target the like provision 1 recruit 1s in your deck.
Yeah.
So that you can thin it out and replace it with recruit 2's provision 2s. Right? That's at least the idea behind it. Maybe that doesn't work out in the end, and I might change the mechanics around that.
The only problem is just that like the rate at which I remove cards is faster than the rate at which I like gain cards.
Yeah.
Just because of the
there is no deck out condition in this game. Like the only victory that matters is on the sectors. So I'm reading on Reiko's description of battle spirits. This is fascinating. Like I'm trying to picture the game in my head. There's some familiar stuff, right? There's sort of attack and power, but like there's essentially leveling up that's happening in the middle of the game. That's really cool.
All right.
I know Magic experimented with that with like a couple of their creature cards, but only for like a set. There's a couple other TCGs that like play around with that space. There was a short-lived digital TCG called Soulforge, where the idea is that when you play a card, any of the cards that you play, a upgraded version is shuffled into your discard. So when your deck gets reshuffled, right, you essentially get the next best version of your card as the game goes on kind of late. Okay, so we got like continuous spirits, right? So I know that Reiko, yeah, at least on the server, you mentioned the fact that Battle Spirits, while it's an interesting game, the design team haven't done necessarily the best job with it. I'm curious as to kind of why, because the system seems pretty compelling. So what went wrong? Oh, Lockdown is great. Oh no, wait. You've already picked it up. So Lockdown is how you win top right.
Yeah, that's that's definitely what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And Lockdown lasts for multiple turns, right? So if you Spark Protest Lockdown, right, they're just not going to have a chance.
Yeah, I think I should do that.
Yeah, you're like enemies in check. They're not going to be able to do anything past this point.
It's just rough because I want to start taking care of the left two.
So you don't have to, because center's worth 2 points. You've got 1 point on the fringe. You pick up another point, you win the game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you just need sufficient control of the sector. You don't need full control. Full control would be way too hard to do the way it's currently set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so long as Spark Protest happens in top right, I think you win. But I think you're like down like one supply, which is fine.
So I used the wrong card. I used the wrench one whose name I've forgotten.
Lockdown, which is fine. Oh no, wait, you did sabotage and lockdown.
Yeah, I did both of them, which
I don't believe so. So unfortunately you were in position to win and you weren't able to kind of see it. This is my fault, right? I need to make that more visible, right? So like people don't, you know how like chess.com's like, oh, like you did like a misplay kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, good news.
Oh, no, wait, no, good news. Yeah. And then it's gonna do the check at the very end.
Yeah, because we want to make sure that I don't lose access to one of them.
Oh, okay. So the international release. Yeah, you won. Well done.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully that felt earned the second time around. Like you knew what strategy to adapt to. And the goal is that each time you play the game, right, you get a better sense of what the Empire is able to do. Mm-hmm. One, my hope is to flesh out the emergent storytelling stuff, because all of that stuff is so this is gonna be kind of funny. Open F8, open the console. It'll cause it to chug. I think just type in like Neil dot and then see what the data structure is. I think I showed this to you at one point. There's a bunch of cards. Check Neil dot rebelsec. And then look at rebel data. It should still be there. I don't think I clean it until you restart the game. Is rebel data empty?
Oh, there we go.
No, it's
dead list 32.
And again, this there's a couple of undefined in there.
Yeah.
That's bad. That should have been okay. But there's a giant list of rebel names in there. That I just got off like a name generator. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to learn how to make a name generator. It seems fairly viable, right? And but for each instance of a game, I generate all the people that you could potentially recruit, right? And then they go in. And then I want to do the stuff that I was telling you about, if two of the rebels are on the same mission, right? They start building a bond, right, and things like that. Start building I want to do the sort of XCOM style stuff, right? But in the background, right? So that let's say that a player focuses on the planet, they can see who all are the members in the rebel cell, right? What missions that they've been on, right? And maybe even prop gen what their beliefs and things are, right? So you're getting people from different walks of life. One of the coolest things is that so you know the card Turncoat, right? Mm-hmm. Deep cover. Yeah. Those convert an Imperial, and I track them.
Okay.
I track if you were a former Imperial turning into a rebel, and I think that could be really cool for storytelling purposes.
Yeah.
Right?
All right. I think we should probably end this stream.
Yeah. Reiko's laying it in to the Battlespurs folks.
I hit a wall about partway through the Rebel sector playthrough. And only recognized that once the game was over that's what had happened. So thanks everybody for joining. I hope the educational portion was educational. I hope the Rebel sector portion was educational and inspiring. Neil, I hope you continue to develop Rebel sector.
I hope so too. But I am in awe of the fact that Avril Lavigne is on a CCG. This is wild. This is absolutely wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Reiko, thank you so much for sticking around. Okay. So I think the important thing is I make sure that this we save the VOD for this.
Yes.
Right.
Of course.
And then make sure before you eat dinner and stuff to save script1.js and then post that in Cartoon Combat so that Excel can reference it once they wake up.
Yes. All right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for doing this.
thanks for coming, everybody.
Oh man, you really need to rest now.
I need to rest.